So we're going to try something today. I'm going to go with my speculation that my frustration on this saw is about the in-carburetor governor, to where when it gets to a certain RPM, um, this little valve opens up and just dumps fuel into the motor, keeps it from revving any further, right? A lot of four-stroking going on. Pretty common with old saws. And I guess you could speculate that's one of the reasons why they've lasted so long is because you can't over rev them. But I want to disable that, and I would consider that a saw modification. So this will be a modded saw if I'm successful with this particular operation. One thing I have is a whole bunch of junk. Kind of the nature of the beast, I think, when you try to collect saws, or it's a hobby, not for real, so I don't have to be all that efficient with the parts. Got a lot of wind going. But that's a 480 Husqvarna. Then you'll notice that the handle is fairly separate. That was an evolution from this series. This was like an L65, L77 series, where basically it was all in the case. That's one big casting right there. I need to get that one running again. I had that running for a while. I actually used it for a while. And I had ended up with this. This is a top end for the L77. And if you notice, it's the same one there. It just doesn't have broken fins. So really, Husky used this series of top end for many years. That basic layout's kind of common to two strokes of that era, all the way up into the 90s, actually. And basically the RPMs were limited by the transfer size, which is fine. But it was also limited by something else. That's where I'm going to go today. So anyway, L77, that might be a 65, but basically that L series, A series even, all the way up through the 480s used exactly the same top end piston, which is good news for the people who like those old saws, right? And again, the limiting factor is the cross-sectional area of the transfers, and you're really not going to do much to make them run at a higher RPM, and it really doesn't matter on saws of that age. But there's another thing that would limit the RPMs on a saw, and that's what I'm going to address today. I have boxes of carburetors and carburetor parts and stuff like that. And on the Tillotsons that were used on that era Husky, some of them had this feature that was in the body of the carburetor governor. And if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I've been struggling a little bit with my 285, which is actually probably running the way it's supposed to run. It's just I want a little crisper on top, and I don't like it going into that burble, which is really the in carburetor rev limiter dumping fuel so that it can't go too high an RPM. And actually, one of the reasons I think a lot of these old saws survived is because it has that feature. You're sure not going to rev them and lean them out on top, because that thing will just start dumping in the fuel. So those high RPM seizes are not happening. And so there's good news in that, but there's also bad news. You can lean the carburetor out so it has other issues trying to get RPMs, which are never going to happen if you see a little brass plug like that. Just not happening, because it just simply won't be able to rev. So what we're going to do is take the carburetor off the 285, and what I'm going to do is either try to replace it with one that's big enough in diameter that does not have the rev limiter, or we're just going to take that thing out and put a piece of either plastic or probably a little piece of tin in there just to block off the hole so it can't flow fuel and make it run that burbly rich at the higher RPMs. Now, actually what happens on that saw is if you push down on it and pushes the RPMs where it wants to be, where it was designed to run, it pulls hard. You know, it really does. But since I've been running the newer saws, I'm used to that, you know, snappy throttle, the higher RPMs. Even though when you push on even the new saws, you're bringing it down into the power band, it bothers me that it doesn't run more crisp on top. It's just me. And again, on these carburetors, the throttle comes off pretty quick. You can just, here, I'll show you. See how it goes right there? You just pop right out and just twist it out of here. But the choke is going to come out as the carburetor comes out, and you got to remember to hook the carburetor to it before you put it back in, because you can't get the choke lever on. That's really the only takeaway. So here's the carburetor that came out of the saw. Came out pretty easy, like they always do. You see that big old gaping hole? And if you look at the very bottom, you'll see a hole there as well. Well, this little brass thing is like this little valve, and that hole in the bottom of the body of the carburetor lines up with these things right here, that groove, right? And then this right here in the beginning is a little ball bearing with a spring, and that mechanism effectively lets fuel in and then dumps it into the carburetor, which dumps it into the motor and stops it from revving. So what I've got to do is figure out how to limit that thing so it doesn't do that. That's the mission. That's what the mission is. In order to get that out, it came out pretty hard, but I was able to do it by just moving the shaft out a little bit. And I was able to get it out with a normal screwdriver. Of course, I put a wrench to the screwdriver, but that's besides the point. So let me see if I can come up with a way to plug that hole. Well, so I think what I'm going to do is just take a little piece of fuel line, stick it down in that hole. Because if you look carefully, the hole exits the body of the carburetor. Let me see if I can bring it up here. There you can see it. So that hole goes right into there. It has a little filter element. So if I take this little piece and set it down there and push it in push it in kind of hard and squeeze it into the hole, that should keep fuel from getting in there for now. And that's fuel line, so for the life of my using that saw, it's probably just fine. Might want to use a piece of metal or tin can or something like that too. Just something that basically plugs up that hole more than it is all you got to do. So basically what I did was I took the choke plate out, remove that valve, put a piece of fuel line underneath it, crank that down as hard as I could, and then I'm going to put this little choke back on and put the screw in there, make sure it's, centered properly, put the screw back in there, put the carburetor on and see if I can tell a difference. And I'll say it again, hook that on there before you go any further. Start from there. Then I put in the filter holder. I run the screws in so I can capture that gasket before I tighten anything down. The throttle, you can pretty much put it in any time. So I'm going to say it's a completely different saw now. So I can continue on my trek to try to build it into something more useful for me. Because just that one little modification right there just changed its entire characteristics for running at the cut speeds I want to cut. And I'll check the plug and stuff like that, make sure I don't lean it out too much. And I got to do something with that muffler. But wow, what a change.